I started when I was 4 years old, and it had to do with the perception of my grandmother. They brought a radio into the house, and I used to flip into stations, from a station to a station, and every time that I would hear something with music, I would leave the radio, dance to the music, and if I was imitating something that they were singing, I was singing exactly with the same notes or the same pitches that they were singing. So my grandmother got very enthusiastic and rushed me to a conservatory. They started me on piano. And then my grandfather, I was 5 years old, and he came with a surprise that he really bought a real piano, a second-hand piano. And that is how classical music became part of my household. By the time I actually I migrated, to the United States, I was actually an accomplished pianist, and I was thinking that that's going to be my career. And I won competitions and all of that. Yes, I arrived in the United States, and 3 days after arriving there, I made the decision to go to New York. And I'm still in New York.
We should talk about the Dance Theatre of Harlem.
Okay. So by the time I arrived in the United States, and I, by chance, met Arthur Mitchell, which is the one that had this project in mind when he approached me about becoming his accompanist. And at the time, it was good because I didn't speak English. So piano saved my life. I'm also an improviser because this is something that happens, at least in the islands. You are in the conservatory, you're getting the training, but on the weekends, you're hanging out with your friends, playing salsa and playing anything, you see. So you learn you develop improvisation skills. And that is something that he liked. And when he sort of asked me to be his accompanist, he told me not to play with any books, to, create based on what I saw, based on his choreography that he was putting together or the exercises that he had given to the dancers and things like that. So that's how one day he said, why don't you write something and I'll do a choreography. When he asked me to do that, I was so moved that this man would tell me to write something that he was going to choreograph, So I put a piece together, don't ask me, don't ask me. I had to run to a library, get books in theory, books in composition, because I have not studied composition. I wrote this piece called Tones for piano and chamber orchestra, and it was recorded. I was the pianist in the recording, and he did the choreography. And that was the first ballet of the Dance Theatre of Harlem.
Sounds magic.
Yes, it was magical, and it was magical when I saw the performance and the dancers and the lights and the audience and everything, and that's when I said, I better study composition.
So am I right in thinking you were musical director?
Yes, I became the music director of the company and the conductor of the company, and sometimes I actually, we had ballets, like the Shostakovich Piano Concerto, that one, and I think that's number 2. And I actually, from stage, I was on stage with the dancers doing the choreography, and I conducted from stage the musicians at the same time. We would do all kind of very interesting things.
Through this world, you were also then conducting as well.
Same thing happened. We went to the Spoleto Festival, and it was Giancarlo Menotti, the one that actually created that festival, and Arthur Mitchell collaborated with him many, many times. So when we went there to the Spoleto Festival in Rome, it was about 20 minutes from Rome or something like that, all of a sudden said, you're going to conduct the orchestra. I said, me? I was always jumping into wearing whichever hat that was needed. But then, they say, all the ballets. Come on, you can conduct the orchestra. And I said, but Well, the thing is that they threw me in the pit. With the Juilliard Orchestra was the one that was there. And it was very interesting because that training that I had with the solfege and conducting everything, that I was sight reading, that's what actually helped me do my first performance, even that I have not conducted in my life. But what happened is that while I was conducting, in my mind, I was solfeging everything. And then my hands knew what to do because of the solfege.
Have you found conducting quite useful as a composer?
Of course. You learn a great deal about your own music. When putting something on the page, I think of the conductor. Usually I give a lot of work to the musicians, you see, because they are the ones that are moving the music within the different measures and things like that. But I try not to complicate things for the conductor. I'm very interested in the music moving through, you see, without thinking so much about bar lines.
How would you, for example, compose a new piece for an orchestra? Where do the sounds come from?
I have no idea. Let's assume that I have a specific theme that I want to actually base or be inspired for the piece. I have to then get into that world, or I have to create that world. And for example, at one point I wrote a piece based on culture from Japan. And you're not, I mean, don't laugh for what I'm going to tell you, but that is when I started eating sushi. I wanted to understand the culture. I looked at a lot of the theater of the no, you see, to understand the syntax and how that culture works with the space. So in other words, I want to build a relationship. It's like Messiaen, and he was enamored of the birds, and he transcribed many bird songs, and then that influenced his music. So this is something that I understand. At least it happens to me. I had to feel the world that I'm going to create. And then once that is established, I just go.
What kind of music do you listen to at the moment, and what inspires you now?
I love to discover new composers that I don't know. For example, coming to Europe often, I am actually learning so many voices that I didn't know of. I love composers, you see. I feel that a composer is such a contributor to society, and composers are saying what perhaps we are not discussing. I don't go for, I don't like this or I don't like this. No. It intrigues me when I don't understand something. And in fact, I can tell you of one of the experiences in my life was being friend of John Cage. And John Cage used to say, when you don't understand something, you have to listen to it again.
Wow, when did you meet John Cage?
Oh my God, I've been in New York more than 50 years. You see?
Everyone bumps into each other.
And I bump into incredible people. And in the 80s, let's say, the 80s and the 90s, composers were very, very amicable with each other. And if you were a young composer, they wanted to be your mentor. Yes, you would go to a concert and they would meet you. And all of a sudden, the next concert, they will invite you to have tea.
Am I right? You knew Leonard Bernstein?
Leonard Bernstein, that was, my teacher.
Your teacher?
Yeah, at Tanglewood.
Wow, so
Conducting teacher.
What was he like to work with?
Unbelievable. I remember I was studying the score of La Mer, and he made me repeat a passage, I don't know how many times. He said, I'm not going to let you go until you don't see the sea in front of you. It was amazing. And I learned a great deal. I had only one composition teacher. Her name was Ursula Mamlock, and she was born in Berlin. And it was, incredible. incredible, because I was in touch with her until the very end. And to hear their voices in the back of my mind, encouraging me, and taking me by the hand in a way, reassuring me, supporting me, giving me so much love. It's like when I have to mentor now, it's not that I have replaced them, but now I understand what that is all about. Specifically, when we realize that these young minds, they have the talent and they want to say what they perhaps not yet know how to say it, and to let them know, to reassure them that they can do it, and then to see them blossom, it's just unbelievable. Listening to their pieces at the end of the cycle, for me, is just like, having a child, which is having a baby. You see? The story that I've been telling you, how I began and everything, sometimes I am in a concert hall listening to one of my pieces, and what is going on through my head is entire film of all of these performing, all of these episodes, from the same day that Arthur told me, why don't you write a piece and I'll do a choreography. I mean, all of this crosses my mind. It's like, my God, I'm doing this. I still don't believe that I do what I do as a musician. I said to you, the child in me has not died. It's like this child inside of me telling me, look. Yeah, I am very honored that I have been actually asked to work with the London Philharmonic, because first of all these musicians across the pond that I never saw before, I never had the possibility to collaborate with and to make friends. It's like I arrived today and all of a sudden the musicians were, hey, and I feel for that, to give a chance to composers that have a different voice, perhaps. I mean, it might be risky to some, but we are in this together, meaning, we are musicians and we're looking for each other. And it's important that we meet and learn from each other as much as I am learning, by being resident with this wonderful orchestra. And then, of course, working with the Institute, and the young composers, I mean, that is another extension of the entire family, you see, because, I mean, it's inviting new voices to actually be here, and they are getting advice, and they are getting a lot of counseling and encouragement as well, which is, I mean, that is something that I told you from the very beginning. Even from my family, I was very encouraged to pursue what I didn't know it was my dream then, you see. And these youngsters, they are already coming with a dream, so it's easier for us to embrace them and to say, okay, let's do this together. So I'm enjoying myself tremendously and learning tremendously. And this is going to be an experience that I will never forget.